My name is Leo Peloso. This is my audience. And I'm going to give an informative speech on the sinking of the Titanic. So let me start by saying that this speech is to inform, and it's to inform my audience about how the sinking of the Titanic went along. The sinking of the Titanic, it still remains one of the biggest naval tragedies in history. But let's talk a little bit about the Titanic first. The Titanic was the biggest and most luxurious ship over time. And let me give you some facts about how big it was. The Titanic was about 882 feet long, and at its widest point it was about 92.5 feet long, so we can see how big it was. It could accommodate about 3,000 passengers and 860 crew members in one cruise. Now, what is important, why is this still relevant today? The reason is because today cruise shipping has become one of the most important destinations for vacations and trips, so it's still really relevant for today, even though it happened almost more than 100 years ago. I would like to talk about this because I always liked big ships, and probably the Titanic is the most famous one. And also because I've done a lot of research, books and online research that inform us about what happened that day. So let's start in the beginning. Like I said, the Titanic was very big and huge. We talked about the length and the width, but also was very, very luxurious. It was equipped with pools, gymnasiums, restaurants, spas, something that was never heard at that time. The cost to build the Titanic, if we put it in today's dollars, it will be $174 million, so very expensive. It took 3 years and 2 days to be completed, and it was completed the 2nd of April of 1912. So now that we have an idea about the size of the Titanic, let's talk about the tragedy. The Titanic sank the 15th of April of 1912, and more than 1,500 lives were lost. Let me give you some details about that. From those 1,500 lives that were lost, the Encyclopedia Britannica states that more than 700 were from the third-class passengers. Actually, only 174 of the total of third-class passengers survived, so they suffered the greatest loss. And another 700 were from the crew members, so that's for mostly where the 1,500 lives were lost. So it was, we can say that was probably the biggest part, or the saddest part of the tragedy, is the loss of human life. Now, the truth is that all of this could have been avoided. The tragedy of the Titanic could have been prevented. Why do we say that? First fact, the Titanic was sailing too fast. The reason that they were doing that is because it was the first voyage, and the company that owned the Titanic was trying to have a record trip between Northern Ireland and New York, and they thought that going as fast as they could will sell most tickets, will be best propaganda for the ship. But also, and probably the biggest part, is that there were not enough lifeboats for passengers and crew in the Titanic. As big as it was, the Titanic was only carrying 20 lifeboats, which could only provide, it could only salvage about 1,500 people, even though the total capacity of the ship was about 3,000. So they were very low in lifeboats. Another reason as well is that once the Titanic had hit the iceberg, the idea that it was an unsinkable boat created this fake safe feeling in the crew members, and they didn't do enough to call for rescue, and that further aggravated what happened and created more life losses than they should have been. So as we've seen, we talked about how big the boat was when the tragedy happened, and that was on the 15th of April of 1912. More than 1,500 lives were lost, and all of this could have been prevented if the ship would have been going slightly slower, and also if they would have carried more lifeboats. So the Titanic still remains a big part of our culture, and it's been featured in movies and songs and books, and maybe that's why we're still talking about it, but as we've seen, it was a tragedy that could have been prevented. Thank you.